Okay, this is a tutorial for getting animation on a clutter object or a door or whatever else, anything that's pretty much not a character. There's a number of other tutorials on that. There's 0 tutorials on what I'm about to show you. I made a tutorial for 3ds Max using these similar tools, but there was a number of problems. You couldn't get rotational keys, the scaling didn't work. This works fairly well that I've seen. There's a few limitations on certain things, but I mean, if you just wanted animation to open up a chest or whatever, this will give you more than you need to do pretty much anything like that. Anything. I mean, you can even get super complex with it, as long as you stay with the one bone chain. As far as I know, you can only use one set of bones. So, that was my failed upload because it's raining over here. Anyways, okay, so the first thing we need is the mesh tool in one mesh injector by Anton. You can come and search, type Anton in the author section, and he's got a number of really interesting tools that you can use. Some you might need, especially the behavior file creator. I don't think you need it for what I'm going to show you, but if you use if you want to have a custom idle or something, you probably need that. In fact, you might even need it for this. I'm only going to show you how to get animation basically into Nifscope. And I've imported a broken version from 3ds Max into the game, and it still worked. For sure, it still worked. It just it was just all kinds of borked. So this mesh injector is very important because it's going to essentially it's an alternative to Nifscope, in the sense that, or rather I should say the Nif Tools exporter, especially for Blender, because the latest version that I'm aware of that's official of the Nif Tools exporter for Blender is for 2.49. I know he's got an alpha out for 2.62, I believe. But you can use I believe 2.62 to 2.69 with a mesh injector. It essentially takes an OBJ file of your mesh and injects it into Nifscope. And it's actually fairly easy to use, and it works pretty well with the body animator. And so you need the mesh injector, by Anton, and you need the body animator by Anton. So that's the first thing you get. I'm using Blender 2.69. The mesh injector will come basically just with an executable and some instructions and a DLL file. The body animator will come with an executable, DLL, and 3 folders: scripts for Blender, It says 2.65, so maybe that's the lowest you can use for the body animator. I think you can use a lower version for the mesh injector. Shouldn't matter. In fact, you should probably be able to use 3ds Max and still use the mesh injector. So we have these 3 scripts that we need. Here's the information. These are the Blender exporter settings for OBJ. Here's the instructions text. And here's where we need to go first. It's in the example folder. We need to grab this dummy Blender file right here and drop it in to our new Blender scene. And what you're going to notice first is that we have 3 bones. We have an NPC root, which is this guy. We have a controller base, which is the one below it. Then we have just a regular armature bone. And of course the mesh. Now he's got animation on this. This is a sample, but you need to use this sample. So let's go ahead and we just get rid of the mesh. And from my testing that I've done, you can only have 1 bone system, and you can only have 1 object for the mesh injector to work. Now you might be able to get around this by say you use 3ds Max. You can have 5 different objects that aren't joined together, that are totally separate, and it'll export just fine, and it'll export them as each a tri-shape in NifScope. But with the mesh injector, it seems to only be able to inject 1 object per NIF. So I'm still waiting to hear back if there's you can actually use or inject more than 1. I tried it and I failed. And it's important to keep this bone right here as your base, and you can make other bones you know, if you need to. I mean, you could come in and subdivide however many bones you want. You can make them come out of the side, or whatever you want to do. And so this really needs to be our root bone, and we're not going to mess with these 2. So the first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and let's go in the graph editor. The animation should be selected. If it's not, you can hit B and select it. Let's just get rid of all this animation. We'll pop back into the 3D view, and let's go ahead and just make a very simple mesh. Oops. And we will scale this down. So that's about as fancy as I'm going to get. We'll hit Alt G to put this back to the origin. Move it over. Ideally, just have it right here in front of this nub. I don't know if you can see it. It doesn't really matter. Okay, now we need to go into object mode. Right click this. First right click the mesh. Shift right click the armature. And then Control P. And we'll just go ahead and use automatic weights. We'll parent it with automatic weights. It doesn't matter, this is too simple. We'll grab the bone. We'll X-ray that. It's that X-ray is in display in the armature where it looks like a guy. And the first thing we need to do is, well, let's go into pose mode. We'll grab our bone. And we need to set our initial keyframe. First, we can come down here and I want to mention this. Say you wanted something to move fairly far away, and that was your animation. There's only so much distance an animation, a skinned object can move per frame. So if you have 30 frames, it could cut it off right here. If you have 60 frames, it might get over here. If you have 90 frames, you could get over here. The point being, it's not only dependent on how far it is, it's dependent on how many frames you have. So we can just middle mouse this out. Hold down middle mouse, drag it to the end. We will left click and drag. Let's just get 50 frames. And come into frame, and we'll set the end frame. Drag it back. We'll create an initial pose. We'll hit I on the keyboard. Location, rotation, scale. So this will set a keyframe for all 3 different keys. That way, if we mess up something, we can always go back to 0. So X, there we go. So we'll rotate it up at 1/4. Oh, whoops. I guess it's important to come down here and turn on the automatic keyframe insertion. X, make sure we got it. Let's go at about 45 or so. Actually, how about we get exact? And we will then come over here to about this. Oh, Blender. There's another 45. Now we can start rotating it just a little bit. Actually, I'll take that back. Okay, and then we can move the frame. Let's get rid of that horrible thing right there. And let's go ahead and scale it down. Actually, let's come over here and scale it down. Well, you can't accuse me of being an animator. So, now that we have this, let us go into our scripting world space, or whatever the hell they call this. Control A, delete whatever's there. We need to go back into our body animator folder and go into, whoops, scripts for Blender. We need to open all three scripts up. Here they are. 1, 2, and 3. And the first one, we will Control C. We'll right click and copy. Control V to paste it in there. And it's important here that we grab the armature. The armature must be selected. It is. So what I do is I'll just hit in here, I'll hit Control A to select it all, right click and run script. I have no idea, to be honest, if you have to select all this. You have to do it in 3ds Max. Maybe you have to do it here. Alright. Let's get our script number 2. Control C. Control V. Control A. You can hit Alt P to run the script, or just right click and run it. And this, for the second script, you don't have, it doesn't really matter where you're at. I always typically stay in pose mode. I mean, you don't have to select anything. You could just copy it in there and run the script. But for script 3, we need to be in pose mode. And we are in pose mode. Okay? Now, now that we've created our script or exported our animation, we'll come back in here, come on over to object mode, export wavefront OBJ. We'll call this slurp 0 0. And I typically export it to the Injector folder for the mesh injector, because that's where we're going to need it. So here's our export options: selection only, include normals, include UVs, triangulate faces. This is very important. Triangulate faces and include normals. It will not work. In fact, probably all of these won't work if you don't have them ticked. Objects is OBJ objects. Forward, Y forward, up, Z forward, or Z up. So Y forward and Z up. And we can export that. And what I'm going to do real quick though, I'm going to take you along for this, unfortunately for you. I want to make it real quick. We'll mark the seams. Looks good to me. So we have the, that's very important if you want to have some sort of UV map so you can texture it for your thingamajig. Because you really don't want to you really don't want to export this and not have your UV set up, because then you'd have to be doing this all over again. Okay. Let's hop back on over into the Injector, the Mesh Injector folder, where we saved our, what did we call it? Oh, we called it Slurp. Here's our OBJ. What we need to do first is right click it and edit with Notepad. If you don't have Notepad++, you can use a regular Notepad. And we'll open up the OBJ, and what we're looking for is this at the top, where it says O is the object, and this is the name of the object. Sometimes you might see, you know, cube 01.002, whatever. Just make sure you name this something that you can remember, and it's case sensitive. So if it's an uppercase C, lowercase UBE, you need to remember that. So we can save that in the OBJ. And let's trawl back here to the body animator and the example. And we're looking for the dummy nef. You can technically probably use any nef, but this is This one's already sort of set up and ready to go. We need to come down here to the 9 node. Make sure it's the 9 node with the nitri shape, not the one with the skeleton. The one with the tri-shape that highlights this. And we need to come down here to the text in the block details on the name of the nitri shape and put in our name of our obj object, the object that's in the obj file. You can name it in Blender, but I've noticed that sometimes it puts those weird numbers and stuff on the end of it. It'll attach names. I don't know how to do it. If you're better at Blender than I am, which you probably are, you can probably figure it out. But I always like to double check so I don't get errors and have to come back in here and rename it. So I don't think you need any of this. You don't need this extra data or this 9 node right here, but hey, let's just leave it in. It works. So we'll call this slurp derp. Slurp derp. And we need to come find it. Put it into our Injector folder. So it's the same folder. You have the slurp obj from Blender. You have the slurp dirt nif that we just cleaned. And you have the mesh injector executable. You can hit the Windows key and R to get to the run, or you can come down here and hit start and type in CMD. Grab it, drag it to the side. The first thing we need is the mesh injector executable. Make sure there's a space behind it. Make sure there's a space behind everything you put in here, or it will not work. Next we need the nif, slurp dirt nif, and then, whoops, finally we need the obj. And then we need to come in here and dash Q. After we put a space, dash Q. And if you don't put dash Q, it'll ask you a bunch of questions that you probably get wrong, so just hit dash Q. It's going to create a slurp dirt new nif. Ah, this shading, or the shading groups are horrible in Blender, but that's our file. There you go. It's ready to go. So that's what we need. We need to grab this. We need to copy it, cut it, whatever you want to do. Drop back into our body animator folder. Paste. We need this thing again, and we need to grab, oh, before we do that, we need to come in here into the Blender folder. I'm using the 64-bit, so it's in Program Files, 64. Blender Foundation, Blender. It's in the main folder here. And here's all the text: skeleton.txt, weights.txt, zbonekeys.txt. That's what we need. Whoops. So let's copy or cut those. Come back into our body animator folder. Paste. I've been doing this before. We will just override those and put them in. So, back to our command line. Let's grab body animator, and you guessed it, space. Next we need our slurp dirt nif. Space. skeleton text space. Weights space and Z bone keys in that order. Enter. Nah, did it work? I don't know. You should get a slurp derp new. Now, what you might notice, because I'm not recording at the highest whatever you want to call it, is that it actually got not only the rotation, the position, but the scale. Now, with the exporter from NIF tools, the BS lighting shader property usually doesn't work on export. So I don't know where he got this lighting shader property. It doesn't matter. You can copy it. You can come in here in the lighting shading property and copy over every single thing that you see that's correct, and it still won't work on export. I don't know why it's broken. It is. So I always control delete the BS lighting shader property. You're probably wondering why I'm talking about this. You'll see in a second. We don't have alpha unless you have an alpha channel on your textures. You don't need an alpha property. So control N. Oh, look at my beautiful book. We'll go ahead and steal this. And highlight the nitri shape. Paste it in. So why am I talking about this? I want to point out something that's not directly related, but vertex colors. If you have this ticked, usually, and you don't have vertex colors, it either won't show up or it'll show up as black. So your entire model would be black. Make sure to untick that if you don't have vertex colors. And since I don't have vertex colors on the model, as far as I know, I don't think you can get vertex colors in doing it this way. Maybe you can, injecting it into the mesh. Make sure double-sided's off unless you need it. But here's the issue. We need to have skinned on here. Otherwise, it probably won't work. So make sure skinned is on because we have skin in here. Everything else looks like it's fairly decent. Enable havoc. Well, do we really need I don't think so. I don't think that's moving anywhere. And usually that's based on the collision, which we don't have. And if you want to get collision into it, you might be able to use chunk merge. Maybe. I mean, I don't see why not. And I have a tutorial for chunk merge, if you're wondering about it. Skeleton if yes, enable animation. And if you have collision, you will enable that too. So the BSX flags is very important. And this is pretty much what you need to do to get it. Now, you might need to make a behaviors file for this. I doubt it, but I don't know. And one of the reasons you might need a behaviors file, you might not need a behaviors file, is because the animation resides in the NIF itself. And like I said, I imported one into the CK. You could see that it was animating, but I don't know if it was obviously messed up because I was doing it through 3ds Max. I don't know if it was because I did it through 3ds Max or because you need to do something else to get this animation to work. I don't know. You might even have to use the legacy script for the Gamebryo animations, which is on the creationkit.com. I can't remember the exact name of it. You might have to call it in there. I don't think so. I think this can just straight up plug into the creation kit as it is right now. If you guys come in and test this, and you can get multiple objects in the mesh injector, or you can get multiple chains, bone systems, because I wanted to have something where there was basically 3 of these and they were all twirling around and they all sort of, tucked away into one at the very end. And I really spent a lot of time doing it, and the animation was awesome. And then I realized not only can you not get 3 objects into the mesh injector, it probably wouldn't have imported the animation correctly into the NIF. So I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, you can leave it down in the comments or get a hold of me on the Nexus or the Beth forums or wherever. And if you got any more data or information on these tests, just drop me a line and let me know.